outwits Mother Nature. So, are you able to listen, guys? So, yes. As a fitting climax to this chapter, I wish to introduce one of the most unusual persons I have ever known. I first saw him a few minutes after he was born. He came into हाँ क्या काम है भाई तुम So yes, we are continuing again. अरे भाई इधर से आवाज आ रही उधर से आवाज आ रही समझ नहीं आता बिल्कुल तो I first saw him a few minutes after he was born. He came into the world without any physical sign of ears, and the doctor admitted, when pressed for an opinion, that the child might be deaf and mute for life. I challenged the doctor's opinion. I had the right to do so. I was a child's father. I too reached a decision and rendered an opinion. But I expressed the opinion silently. In the secrecy of my own heart, I decided that my son would hear and speak. Nature could send me a child without ears, but nature could not induce me to accept the reality of the affliction. In my own mind, I knew that my son would hear and speak. How? I was sure there must be a way, and I knew I would find it. I thought of the words of the immortal Emerson. The whole course of things goes to teach us faith. We need only obey. There is guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. The right word, desire. More than anything else, I desired that my son should not be a deaf mute. From that desire, I never receded. Not for a second. Many years previously, I had written, our only limitations are those we set up in our own minds. For the first time, I wondered if that statement were true. Lying on the bed in front of me was a newly born child, without the natural equipments of hearing. Even though he might hear and speak, he was obviously disfigured for life. Surely, this was a limitation which that child had not set up in his own mind. What could I do about it? Somehow I would find a way to transplant into that child's mind my own burning desire for a ways and means of conveying sound to his brain without the aid of ears. More than anything else, I desired that my son should not be a deaf mute. From the desire I never receded, nor for a second. As soon as the child was old enough to cooperate, I would fill his mind so completely with a burning desire to hear that nature would, by methods of her own, translate it into physical reality. All this thinking took place in my own mind, but I spoke of it to no one. Every day I renewed the pledge I had made to myself not to accept that my son would be deaf and mute. As he grew older and began to take notice of things around him, we observed that he had a slight degree of hearing. When reached the age when child usually begin talking, he made no attempt to speak. But we could tell by his action that he could hear certain sounds slightly. That was all I wanted to know. I was convinced that if he could hear even slightly, he might develop still greater hearing capacity. Then something happened which gave me hope. It came from an entirely unexpected source. We bought a record player. When the child heard the music for the first time, he became ec- ecstatic, ecstatic, and promptly appropriated the machine. He soon showed a preference for certain records. Among them, It's a Long Way to Tipperary. Among them, It's a Long Way to Tipperary. On the occasion, On one occasion, he played that piece over and over for almost 2 hours, standing in front of the record player, with his teeth clamped on the edge of the case. The significance of this self clamped on the edge of the case, the significance of this self formed habit of his did not become clear to us until years afterward, for we had never heard of the principle of bone conduction of sound at that time. Self-formed habit of this did not become clear to us until afterward, for we had never heard of the principle of bone conduction of sound at that time. Shortly after he appropriated the record player, I discovered that he could hear me quite clearly when I spoke with my lips touching his mastoid bone. Lips touching his mastoid bone, or at the base of the brain. These discoveries placed in my possession the necessary media by which I began to translate into reality my burning desire to help my son develop hearing and speech. By that time, he tried speaking certain words. The outlook was from encouraging, but desire backed by faith knows no such word as impossible. Desire backed by faith has no, and stranger still. La, 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 la. Having determined that he could hear the sound of my voice plainly, I began immediately to transfer to his mind the desire to hear and speak. I soon discovered that the child enjoyed bedtime stories, so I went to work creating stories designed to develop in him self reliance, imagination, and a keen desire to hear and to be normal. Desire backed by faith knows no such word as impossible. So I went to work creating stories designed to develop in him self reliance. Creating stories designed to develop in him self reliance, imagination, and a keen desire to hear to be normal. Desire backed by faith knows no such word as impossible. There was one story in particular which I emphasized by giving it some new and dramatic coloring each time it was told. It was designed to plant in his mind the thought that his affliction was not a liability but an asset of great value. Despite the fact that all the philosophy I had examined clearly indicated that every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. I must confess that I had not the slightest idea how this affliction could ever become an asset. However, I continued my practice of wrapping that philosophy in bedtime stories, hoping the time would come when he would find some plan by which his handicap could be made to serve some useful purpose. Every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. Reason told me plainly that there was no adequate compensation for the lack of ears and natural hearing equipment. Desire backed by faith pushed reason aside and inspired me to carry on. As I analyzed the experience in retrospect, I can see now that my son's faith in me had much to do with the astounding results. He did not question anything I told him. I sold him the idea that he had distinct advantage over his older brother and that his this advantage would reflect itself in many ways. For example, the teachers in school would observe that he had no ears, and because of this, they would show him special attention and treat him with extraordinary kindness. They always did. His mother saw to that by visiting the te- teachers and arranging with them to give the child the extra attention necessary. I sold him the idea, too, that when he became old enough to sell newspapers, his older brother had already become a newspaper merchant. He would have a big advantage over his brother for the reason that people would pay him extra money for his wares because they could see that he was a bright, industrious boy. Industrious means like the person who does hardworking person. Despite the fact that he had no ears, we could notice that gradually the child's hearing was improving. Moreover, he had not the slightest tendency to be self conscious because of this affliction. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence that our method of servicing his mind was bearing fruit. For several months, he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid that his deafness made it unsafe for him to go on the street alone. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence that our method of servicing his mind was bearing fruit. For several months, he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid that his deafness made it unsafe for him to go on the street alone. Finally, he took matters in his own hands. One afternoon, when he was left at home with the servants, he climbed through the kitchen window, shinned to the ground, and set out on his own. He borrowed 6 cents in capital from the neighborhood shoemaker, invested it in papers, sold out, reinvested, and kept repeating until late in the evening. After balancing his accounts and paying back the 6 cents he had borrowed from his banker, he had a net profit of 42 cents. When he got home that night, we found him in bed asleep, with the money tightly clenched in his hand. His mother opened his hand, removed the coins, and cried. Of all things, crying over her son's first victory seemed so inappropriate. My reaction was the reverse. I laughed heartily, for I knew that my endeavor to plant in the child's mind an attitude of faith in himself had been successful. My endeavor to plant in the child's mind an attitude of faith in himself had been successful. His mother saw, in his first business venture, a little deaf boy who had gone out in the streets and risked his life to earn money. I saw a brave, ambitious, self reliant little businessman whose stock in himself had been increased 100% because he had gone into business on his own initiative and had won. The transaction pleased me because I knew that he had given evidence of a trait of resourcefulness that would go with him all through life. Later events proved this to be true. When his older brother wanted something, he would lie down on the floor, kick his feet in the air, cry for it, and get it. When the little deaf boy wanted something, he would plan a way to earn the money, then buy it for himself. He still follows that plan. Truly, my own son has taught me that handicaps can be converted into stepping stones on which one may climb towards some worthy goal, unless they are accepted as obstacles and used as excuses. The little deaf boy went through the grades, high school, and college without being able to hear his teachers, except when they shouted loudly at close range. He did not go to a school for the deaf. We would not permit him to learn sign language. We were determined that he should live a normal life and associate with children in the general population, and we stood by that decision, although it cost us many heated debates with school officials. The little deaf boy went through the grades, high school, and college without being able to hear his teachers except when they shouted loudly at close range. He did not go to a school for the deaf. We would not permit him to learn sign language. We were determined that he should live a normal life and associate with children in the general population, and we stood by the decision, although it caused us many heated debates with school officials. While he was in high school, he tried an electrical hearing aid, but it was of no value to him. We believed this was due to a condition that was disclosed when the child was 6. Dr. J. Gordon Wilson of Chicago operated on one side of the boy's head and discovered that there was no sign of natural hearing equipment. During his last week in college, 18 years after the operation, something happened which marked the most important turning point of his life. Through what seemed to be mere chance, he came into possession of another electrical hearing device which was sent to him on trial. He was slow about testing it due to his disappointment with similar device. Finally, he picked the instrument up and carelessly placed it on his head, hooked up the battery, and lo, as if by a stroke of magic, his lifelong desire for normal hearing became a reality. For the first time in his life, he heard practically as well as any person with normal hearing. His lifelong desire for normal hearing became a reality. God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. Overjoyed because of the changed world, overjoyed because of the changed world that had been brought to him through his hearing device. He rushed to the telephone, called his mother, and heard her voice perfectly. The next day, he plainly heard the voices of his professor in class for the first time in his life. Previously, he could hear them only when they shouted at short range. He heard the radio, he heard the talking pictures for the first time in his life. He could converse freely with other converse. Okay, all right, with the other people without the necessity of their having to speak loudly. Truly, he had come into possession of a changed world. We had refused to accept nature's error, and by persistent desire, we had induced nature to correct that error through the only practical means available. Desire had commenced to pay dividends, but the victory was not yet complete. The boy still had to find a definite and practical way to convert his handicap into an equivalent asset. Hardly realizing the significance of what had already been accomplished, but intoxicated with the joy of his newly discovered world of sound, he wrote a letter to the manufacturer of hearing aid, enthusiastically describing his experience. Something in his letter, something perhaps, which was not written in the lines, but between them, prompted the company to invite him to New York. When he arrived, he was escorted through the factory, and while talking with the chief engineer, telling him about his changed world, a hunch, an idea, or an inspiration, call it what you wish, flashed into his mind. It was this impulse of thought that converted his affliction into an asset destined to pay dividends in both money and happiness to thousands for all time to come. By persistent desire, we had induced nature to correct that error through the only practical means available. The sum and substance of that impulse of thought was this. It occurred to him that he might be help it occurred to him that he might be to of help to the millions of deaf people who go through life without the benefit of hearing devices. If he could find a way to tell them the story of his changed world, then and there he reached a decision to devote the remainder of his life to rendering useful service to the hard of hearing. For an entire month, he carried on intensive research. He analyzed the entire marking system of the manufacturer of the hearing device and created ways and means of communicating with the hard of hearing all over the world for the purpose of sharing with them his newly discovered changed world. When this was done, he wrote a 2 year plan based upon his findings. When he presented the plan to the company, he was instantly given a position for the purpose of carrying out his ambition. Little did he dream, when he went to work, that he was destined to bring hope and practical relief to thousands of deaf people who, without his help, would have been doomed forever to deaf mutism. Shortly after he became associated with the manufacture of his hearing aid, he invited me to attend a class conducted by his company for the purpose of teaching the deaf and mute to hear and to speak. I had never heard of such a form of education, so I visited the class skeptical but hopeful that my time would not be entirely wasted. Here I saw a demonstration of what I had done to arouse and keep alive my son's mind to desire for normal hearing. I saw the hearing impaired actually being taught to hear and to speak. Through application of the self same principle I had used more than 20 years previously in helping my own son. Here I saw a demonstration of what I had done to arouse and keep alive my son's mind the desire for normal hearing. I saw the hearing impaired actually being taught to hear and to speak. Through application of the self same principle I had used more than 20 years previously in helping my own son. Thus, through some strange turn of the wheel of fate, my son Blair and I had been destined to aid in correcting deaf mutism for those as yet unborn. We are the only living human uh, beings, as far as I know, who have established definitely the fact that deaf mutism can be corrected to the extent of restoring to normal life those who have this affliction. It was being done for one, it will be done for others. There is no doubt in my mind that Blair would have been deaf and mute all his life if his mother and I had not managed to shape his mind as we did. When Blair was an adult, Dr. Irving Voorhees, a noted specialist on such cases, examined him very thoroughly. He was astounded when he learned how well my son hears and speaks, and said his examination indicated that theoretically the boy should not be able to hear at all, but the lad does hear, despite the fact that X-ray picture shows that there is no opening in the skull whatsoever from where his ears should be to the brain. When I planted in his mind the desire to hear and speak, that impulse carried with it some strange influence that caused nature to become bridge builder and span the gulf of silence between his brain and the outer world. By some means which the keenest medical specialists have been unable to interpret, it would be sacrilege for me to even conjecture as to how nature performed this miracle. It would be unforgivable if I neglected to tell the world as much as I know of the humble part I assumed in the strange experience. It is my duty and a privilege to say I believe, and not without reason, that nothing is impossible to the person who backs desire with enduring faith. Nothing is impossible to the person who backs desire with enduring faith. I have no doubt that a burning desire had devious ways of transmuting itself into its physical equivalent. Blair desired normal hearing. Now he has it. He was born with a handicap which might easily have sent one with a less defined desire to the street with a bundle of pencils and a tin cup. That handicap now promises to serve as the medium by which he will render useful services to many millions of hard of hearing, as well as to give him useful employment at adequate financial compensation for the remainder of his life. The little white lies I planted in his mind when he was a child by leading him to believe his affliction would become a greater asset which he could capitalize have been justified. There is nothing right or wrong that belief plus burning desire can't make real. These qualities are free to everyone. In all my experience in dealing with men and women who had personal problems, I never handled a single case that more definitely demonstrates the power of desire. Authors sometimes make the mistake of writing of subject of which they have but superficial or very elementary knowledge. It had been my good fortune to have had the privilege of testing the soundness of power of desire through the affliction of my own son. Perhaps it was providential that the experience came as it did, for surely no one in better is better prepared than he to serve as an example of what happens when desire is put to the test. If Mother Nature bends to the will of desire, it is logical that mere men can defeat a burning desire. Strange and imponderable is the power of human mind. We do not understand the method by which it uses every circumstance, every individual, every physical thing within its reach as a means of transmuting desire into physical counterpart. Perhaps science will uncover the secret. The modus operandi, mode of operation by which this astounding result was achieved is not hard to describe. It consisted of three very definite facts. I mixed faith with the desire for normal hearing, which I passed on to my son. I communicated my desire to him in every conceivable way available through persistent, continuous effort over a period of years. He believed me. Several years ago, one of my business associates became ill. He became worse as time went on and finally was taken to the hospital for an operation. Just before he was wheeled into the operating room, I took a look at him and wondered how anyone as thin and emaciated as he could possibly go through a major operation successfully. The doctor warned me that there was little, if any, chance of my ever seeing him alive again. But that was the doctor's opinion. It was not the opinion of the patient. Just before he was wheeled away, he whispered feebly, "Do not be disturbed, Chief. I will be out of here in a few days." The attending nurse looked at me with pity, but the patient did come through safely. After it was all over, his physician said, Nothing but his own desire to live saved him. He never would have pulled through if he had not refused to accept the possibility of death. I believe in the power of desire backed by faith because I have seen the power lift people from lowly beginnings to places of power and wealth. I have seen it rob the graves of its victims. I have seen it serve as the medium by which people staged a comeback after having been defeated in 100 different ways. I have seen it provide my own son with a normal, happy, successful life despite nature's having sent him into the world without ears. How can one harness and use the power of desire? This has been answered through this and the subsequent chapters of this book. All achievement, no matter what its nature or purpose, begins with the burning desire for something definite. Through some strange and powerful principle of mental chemistry, nature wraps up in the impulse of strong desire. That something which recognizes no such world as impossible and accepts no such reality as failure. Expect it. All achievement, no matter what its nature or purpose, begins with the burning desire for something different through some strange something definite is the keyword here. Through some strange and powerful principle of mental chemistry, nature wraps up in the impulse of strong desire. That's something which recognizes no such word as impossible and accepts no such reality as failure. Okay. Expect it. Before passing to the next step, kindly kindle anew in your mind the fire of hope, faith, courage, and tolerance. If you have these states of mind, hope, faith, courage, and tolerance, and a working knowledge of the principles described, all else that you need will come to you when you are ready for it. Let Emerson state the thought in these words. Every proverb, every book, every byword that belongs to the three of for aid, they belongs to the belongs to thee for aid and comfort shall surely come home through open or winding passages. Every friend the great and tender soul in three craved shall lock thee in the embrace in his embrace. What does it mean? Archaic or dialect. You belongs to you for aid. Every proverb, every book, every byword that belongs to you for aid and comfort shall surely come home through open up winding passages. Every friend, the great and tender soul in you craved shall lock you in his embrace. There is a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. The state of mind must be belief, not mere hope or wish. One open mindedness is essential for belief. Open mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith. Courage and belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage, and belief. No more effort is required to demand abundance. Open mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage, and belief. No more effort is required to demand abundance and prosperity than is required to accept misery and poverty. Alright. Remember, no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity than is required to accept misery and poverty. A great poet has correctly stated this universal truth through these lines. I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening when I counted my scanty store. For life is a just employer. He gives you what you ask. Ask. But once you have set the wages, why? You must bear the task. I worked for menial's hire only to learn, dismayed, that any wage I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid. Jesse B. Rittenhouse. The subconscious mind transmutes emotionally charged thought mixed with faith into physical equivalent. The subconscious mind works day and night. The subconscious acts on the thought it is fed, whether they are positive or negative. We will be reading next chapter, that is just step 6. Stamp positive impression on your subconscious mind tomorrow. So be with me, and yes, bye bye.